in general, or normally it focused in the mercury, in mining and stuff like that. I think it's time we come down to some of these things that we ignore, because stuff like naphthalene is one product that human beings are just poisoning themselves for no reason, because you want your place to smell nice, but you have an alternative. Then there are two major wastes that are coming. I will not talk about them, but we also need to think about them. Yes, we have the diapers and our synthetic human hair that our ladies are having. You know, at the end of the day, after 2 weeks or 3 weeks, the nice thing has to go down and one has to come. Some of these things are causing a lot of damage. So as you think about some of these solutions, yeah, out there, we have something new that you may want to look at in Karatina University. Is it Karatina? Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much, Edwin. That was amazing. And I think our today's moderators and speakers have fully heard you, and that we are going to have a better interactive sessions today. Because at the end of the day, we just don't want you to attend, listen, and just go home. We also want to hear what young people are doing at different places. What are some of the solutions that young people are doing, so that we can be able to forge partnerships and see what are some of the best practices that can be implemented elsewhere. So thank you so much. I don't want us to eat into the next session's time. I remember yesterday we were very bad with timing. So I'd request that the remaining comments we are going to discuss more during the coming sessions. So thank you so much for those concrete ideas, and we are going to take them forward. So at this point, I'd like to invite David Ombisi from UN Environment to come give a presentation on environment, gender nexus. Welcome.
Well, thank you, and good morning. As you've been told, my name is David Ombisi from the UN Environment, based here in Nairobi, from the Africa office. Perhaps before I start my presentation, I've been here for a few minutes and had some interesting comments and questions. And normally, one of the biggest question that we normally ask ourselves is that in most cases we do ask, what is the government and other organizations doing for the environment? But I would ask, or I would rather want to ask as an individual, what are you doing for the environment? Because normally the responsibility begins with us. Most of you will agree with me that you've seen, for example, driving around, you see quite often people throwing trash through the windows of their cars. Maybe some of you have done that previously. So normally the question is, what are you as an individual doing for the environment? Because the responsibility begins with us. And unless we are able to take that responsibility and care for the environment, then we'll continue to face the challenges that are still there with regard to pollution and environmental degradation. But having said that, there was, I think, a question in terms of how are the youth being engaged in terms of policies and in terms of addressing the various environmental challenges. One of the things that, and one of my responsibilities is that I do coordinate the Secretariat of the African Ministerial Conference on Environment, AMCEN. Basically, this is a forum that brings together all ministers of environment from the African region. And one of the key things that we have done before every AMCEN conference is to have a pre-AMCEN meeting or pre-session that brings together other stakeholders, major groups, and the youth involved. Because this is where we give an opportunity for the youth, for women, for other groups, private sector, to also be able to give their views and also have that opportunity to engage with the ministers, particularly with regard to policy issues. So we do this often and at every AMCEN meeting. And now also we have a forum, a joint forum of ministers of health and ministers of environment. Because in most cases, health and environment are interlinked, but these two sectors in most cases have been operating separately. So we have now a forum of joint ministers of health and environment in Africa, which brings together the ministers of environment and those of health to be able to see how jointly they can address some of the challenges facing the continent. Good. Having said that, then I'll give a brief presentation in terms of the linkages between environment and health, and also bringing in the gender nexus. So by way of introduction, I'm sure why it's not projecting.
Okay. John, David.
Yeah, all right. So by way of introduction, I've made reference to the outcome document of the United Nations Conference on Sustainable Development, Rio Plus 20. I think most of you are aware of this conference that took place about 5 years ago in Rio. And you'll find that in this document, the future we want, it indicated that health is a precondition for, and it's also an outcome and indicator for all the three dimensions of sustainable development, meaning that if you're talking about social issues, if you're talking about environmental issues, if you're talking about economic issues, you'll find that the issues related to human health cuts across these three dimensions. And therefore, as a region, as countries, if we are able to address the adverse health impacts which are caused by environmental factors, then we'll be greatly contributing to the sustainable development. And therefore, health stands out across these three sectors. And also, when you look at the recently adopted Sustainable Development Goals, the 17 of them, you'll find that when you look keenly at each one of the Sustainable Development Goals, you'll find that the issues of health are also cutting across these particular goals. If you're talking about poverty, the issues of health are also, because with poverty then it causes malnutrition to a number of people. If you're talking about climate change, the impacts of climate change on human health is all there. So health really cuts across all these 17 of the Sustainable Development Goals. Now, in terms of the linkages, it's very clear, and I believe from your discussions yesterday and early this morning, you'll notice that, it's the environment that really contributes to the air that we breathe. It's the environment that contributes the food that we eat. And if you're talking about water, it's all environment related. So if you find that air is polluted, if you find that food is contaminated, if you find that water is polluted, then it has a direct impact on the human health. Now, the problem is the ecosystems that provide the clean air, that provide the food, that provide the water, they are continuously being degraded and polluted. This is because of a number of factors linked to climate change, for example, linked to pollution from the industries, linked to agricultural practices, pesticides and chemicals which are used in agricultural production, and of course also issues related to urban development. Many of you will agree that we are continuously expanding our urban areas, and with this you find that the necessary facilities are not there. So you end up, for example, in informal settlements where you don't have proper facilities, and you'll realize there's a lot of waste emanating from these areas. The garbage collection is a problem, and all these, of course, contribute to negative impacts on the environment. Therefore, it's very clear the link in terms of the poor environmental quality with effects on human health and therefore the quality of our lives. So I've already mentioned issues related to air pollution. I think yesterday and today you're talking about hazardous chemicals and waste, poor water quality, climate change. All these are drivers that contribute to negative impacts on our health. Now, this of course then is directly linked to a number of diseases. Cancer, I mean, as we speak now, I think cancer is growing to be one of the biggest challenges in terms of the causes of death. You're talking about respiratory diseases, allergies, asthma, diarrhea because of, poor quality water, malaria. Some of you may ask, how does malaria come in? Now, when you look at climate change, for example, you find that as a result of the warming up of certain areas, you find certain areas that did not have mosquitoes or malaria-causing mosquitoes now do have mosquitoes. And therefore, those areas you'll find that initially did not have malaria, but now they do have malaria. And this is a result of the warming up of the globe. Now, the problem is that Africa, when you compare with other continents, it carries a hugely disproportionate disease burden as compared to the rest of the world. We have a report as UN Environment, which we've been producing, a flagship report for the African Ministers of Environment. This is the African Environment Outlook Report. And the third edition, that's the African Environment Outlook 3 report, really focused on the linkages between environment and health. This report is available both online. I think we still have a few copies, hard copies, which we can share with some of you, but it will be easy to go online and look at this report. And therefore, this report emphasizes what I've been saying, that environmental factors contribute, particularly in Africa, to about 28% of Africa's disease burden. And these diseases, mostly we find, is related to diarrhea, respiratory infections, and malaria. And these three alone in Africa account for about 60% of non-environmental health impacts in Africa. So you can see where we are coming from in terms of the figures, in terms of the linkages between environmental degradation and health. And this again is related to the extreme weather events and disasters. If you have floods, you know what will happen in terms of implications on our health. I mentioned about re-emerging diseases where you have malaria in certain areas. The issue of Ebola, for example, many people did not link it to environmental conditions. But the fact is, if you take an example of deforestation, this leads to more exposure between people and wildlife, because you're clearing up areas so that you probably either convert them into agricultural land or for settlement. And this then, of course, there is that contact with wild animals. And therefore, the outbreak of Ebola in some parts of Africa a couple of years ago was one of the starkest warning yet, that as we continue to bring down or clear our forests, then we are opening ourselves to new strains of diseases. So the bottom line, or what I'm trying to say, is that if we are to take care of our environment, to reduce deforestation, in a way we'll be contributing to addressing the issue of exposure to diseases, and therefore we'll be addressing the issue of our own betterment of our health. Now, how does gender come in? It's a fact that, for example, women are on the front line of environmental degradation in their homes and also in their work areas. When you're talking about exposure to smoke or cooking, it's the women who are mostly in the kitchen using firewood. And this, of course, causes, indoor air pollution. I'm sure probably yesterday you've been told the number of deaths which are caused as a result of indoor air pollution. And mainly this is because of the use of biomass, charcoal and firewood in cooking. Exposure to pesticides. You'll find again that in most cases, women are exposed. If you look at, for example, the flower farms in Naivasha, and majority of the people who do the harvesting of the flowers, you'll find these are women. And therefore the exposure to the pesticides really causes a lot of death for the women. It's estimated that worldwide, for example, about 2 million deaths every year, which is mainly of women and children, is as a result of burning biomass in unventilated homes. As I mentioned, the issue of using charcoal for cooking, using firewood for cooking. This is basically what causes all this number of deaths. When you talk about water, and I'll come back to that, but again, if you look at the negative health consequences because of environmental risk factors, you'll find that there is evidence, studies have been done, and there is evidence that women and men will suffer differently. If you say, for example, extreme events like floods, droughts, and heat waves, in most cases, when you look at the number of deaths, you'll find that the majority of those who die as a result of that will either be women or young children. And young children, both boys and girls, but majority you'll find again is girls. So I'm just trying to bring in the issue of how the negative environmental impacts and the related health consequences basically causes a lot of impact to women and children. In terms of water scarcity, you'll find that, again, it's the women that have to fetch for the water. And therefore, they end up sometimes getting this water from unsafe sources, including rivers or streams that are already contaminated. And therefore, they'll be the first one in contact with those contaminated rivers and streams. And therefore, the likelihood of them getting sick before other people in the community is quite high. So of course this leads to water-related diseases, diarrhea, and which is also a major cause of death among children under 5 years, not only in Africa, but globally. So having said that, then, what are we doing, or what should we be doing? And again, I believe this is, or rather has been an area of discussion from your interactions yesterday with some of my colleagues. From the UN environment, for example, together working with the World Health Organization and other partners, we've been working in this area of health and environment and gender as well, trying to make sure that we bring together, as I mentioned, from the policy perspective, bringing together the ministers of the different sectors. It's not only ministers of health and environment. We have tried to see to what extent other sectors can also be useful in terms of contributing to addressing these challenges. I'm sure you've already been told about the United Nations Environment Assembly, which, for example, last year, which was the second session of the United Environment Assembly, there was discussions focusing on health environment, healthy people, in terms of how can we ensure that if we have a health environment, we contribute to the health of our people. This year, we have the third session of the United Nations Environment Assembly. I'm sure, again, you've already heard that the focus will be on a pollution-free planet. So basically, we're trying to emphasize the issues of health in relation to environment. And we'll be looking at how then, from a policy level, can ministers give direction in terms of what needs to be done to address these challenges. But as I mentioned at the beginning, these are forums or conferences where we also give an opportunity to the youth, to major groups, civil society, private sector, to be able to participate and engage with their leaders, their ministers, and be able to provide their inputs in terms of which direction we should be going in addressing these challenges. From a region perspective, that's from Africa-wide region, when the ministers of environment and those of health first met, which is about 9 years ago in Gabon, they came up with what we call the Libreville Declaration on Health and Environment in Africa. This was followed by another meeting 3 years later in Luanda in Angola, where again they emphasized the need to and the commitment to address the challenges of health and environment in Africa. Now, within this declaration, they came up with key action points that need to be addressed in terms of making sure that we have the necessary policies in place and we also have the necessary investments in place to address the challenges that we continue to face. Now, as you know, a declaration is one thing, but being able to implement the contents of this declaration, being able to implement what has been agreed upon is another challenge, because this requires funding, this requires political will, this requires commitment, and these are some of the things from UN Environment and our colleagues from World Health Organization. We are trying to work with the governments at the policy level to try and make sure that they are able to keep to their word of what they agreed. I gave an example of a report that was prepared by the World Bank entitled Investing in Health, and which says that if you are able to better manage your home environment, the chances of reducing morbidity from diarrhea-related diseases are as high as 40%. And this is through interventions such as providing safe drinking water and also making sure that you live in a clean and hygienic environment. This would contribute to reducing a number of deaths within our homes. Now, with all those efforts and activities that we continue to undertake, of course, in collaboration with the governments, but not only with governments, but because there are also other non-governmental organizations that are involved in this work, we still realize that we are still facing these challenges. We're still facing the challenges of deaths as a result of environmental pollution. And therefore, what we're trying to say is there's still need for political commitment at the highest level, not only the ministers, but also at the heads of state level. And the reason we are saying this is that we did a survey or research in terms of the budgets of the ministries of environment in Africa. On average, when you compare with the national budgets, you find that what is allocated to the ministries of environment is about 1% of the national budgets. Be it in Kenya, be it in Uganda, be it in Burkina Faso, be it in South Africa. On average, when you look at the amounts that are allocated to the ministries of environment, you'll find it's only 1%. Majority of the budgets will be allocated to ministries of defense to deal with police and the rest. But when it comes to environment, it's very little attention that is provided. So what we mean is that we need that political will at the national level so that enough resources are allocated to ministries of environment to be able to deal with these issues. And if you are protecting the environment, then you're also going to address some of the health implications. The Ministry of Health in these countries, we found out that are slightly allocated more. But that extra budget that is allocated to the Ministries of Health goes towards addressing or treating diseases. So a lot of funds or money is spent in terms of addressing the already impacts or effects in terms of diseases. Yet, if you could allocate some of these resources to the ministries of environment and therefore be able to address the causes that contribute to these diseases, then in a way you'll be saving what you'd rather put under the ministries of health. So we've been discussing with governments to look at it from this perspective to be able to ensure that there is also increased allocation of resources to the ministries of environment. Then, of course, there's the issue of being able to integrate health and environment impact considerations into economic development processes. And this is in terms of the planning processes. There's a need to make sure that the issues of health and environment are embedded within our planning processes, so that when you're talking about policy assessments and other linkages, health and gender, they're also part of the planning processes and not being addressed once the impacts have been seen. There's a need to emphasize gender-sensitive assessments and gender-responsive interventions and policies, making sure that as we address these impacts of negative or degraded environment, we are also looking at the gender perspective. In terms of, as I mentioned, we have the figures, we have the facts that, for example, women and children are mostly affected when these impacts occur. And therefore, in coming up with the policies to address these challenges, we must take into consideration the gender responsiveness of these policies. Therefore, in conclusion, what we are trying to say is that if we put in place measures to improve the quality of environment, if we invest in our environment, then at the end of the day, we'll be making very worthwhile investments. Because you're investing in environment, you're reducing environmental degradation, and on the other hand, you are therefore reducing the environmental risk factors that contribute to a number of diseases that we've just been discussing. Therefore, benefits of many environmental policies in terms of reduced health care costs, as I mentioned, you find the costs related to health care because the diseases are already there. And yet, if we were able to invest in the environment, we could therefore reduce these costs which are related to taking care of our health. So we all need, therefore, to provide a clean and healthy environment, not only now, but also for our future generations, which of course will reduce the number of deaths that we are experiencing at the moment. It will also improve generally the human health and overall our well-being. And of course, as I mentioned, it will then lead to a number of savings, which can then be put into other sectors of our economies. So I'd like to stop there. Thank you very much for your attention, and I'll probably be ready to take one or two questions or clarifying any issues that you might want to be clarified. Thank you very much. Okay, I'll probably take the first three, 1, 2, and then at the back. Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Ombisi, for the presentation. Now, when you introduce yourself, you said that you work or you organize environment ministers across the continent, if I'm not wrong, or even the world. Now, this is an indication that you interact with the actual policy makers in the governments in Africa. Now, the recommendations and even the conclusions are very change-driven and very encouraging. Now, I believe these are some of the information and recommendations that you give to these policymakers. Now, my question is, from your own experience and from your own interaction with this guy, what is the body language or what is their absorption of this particular information? Because I'm sure it's been there for quite some time. The recommendations are there, and you talk to them and they meet and they do conclusions. Are they really willing and working towards implementation of these recommendations and the ideas that you talk about? Thank you.
Thank you. My name is Yvonne Anyango. I present Cooperation Arena for Sustainable Development in Africa, as well as Kajiado County Government. Mine is a concern, really. You just mentioned that you're working closely with the Ministry of Health and Ministry of Environment. I'm just wondering why the Ministry of Education has not been involved in this process, since information is key, and if we can involve the education sector and have topics taught in schools from kindergarten level, I'm sure we can make headways. Thank you very much.
I am.
Sorry.
Okay, sorry. I'm happy, thank you. I'm Dorcas Njoroge from Kajiado County. And your presentation was very informative. Thank you for that. But my concern is that you've mentioned a lot about policies that are in place, that we need to put in place, and we have so many of them on gender issues and environment, etc. Now, are there structures in place to make sure that these policies are implemented on the ground? Because as we have these policies and we're having many conferences, women and children on the ground are continuing to suffer because of the issues and causes that you have clearly mentioned. How can we translate these policies down to the ground so that our people can benefit? And how can we follow up that the policies are actually even relevant to the communities on the ground, and they're not just beautiful documents? Thank you.
Thanks. I think let me respond to those three, and then we'll probably have another round of questions. Great. The first question in terms of, whether the ministers of environment and those of health are willing to, implement these policies. And now, as you know, issues related to policy implementation, it's not a one-day or a one-off kind of event. This is something that takes time. Now, as UN Environment and World Health Organization and other partners that are working together on this initiative, we keep on reminding the governments that this is their responsibility. They need to implement these policies which they have put in place. In actual sense, from the UN side, we do provide support to the governments to actually put in place these policies. But as you realize, when it comes to the actual implementation of the policies, it's actually the responsibility of the governments to do that. From the UN perspective, it's, I would say, tricky for us to push a sovereign member state to implement certain things that they have agreed to implement. But what I'm saying is that we continue reminding them that this is what you have agreed to do. To what extent have you done this? Or what are the difficulties being experienced? If there are any difficulties governments are experiencing, then we come in terms of how can we support to make sure that they're able to implement this. But having said that, some of the responses that we have received, particularly from the ministries of, or ministers of environment, is that they don't have the resources to do this. And I just mentioned in terms of when you look at the budgets, the national budgets, you'll find that it's only 1% that is allocated to ministries of environment. But then how do we address that? What we've been trying to do, and gradually what we're trying to do, is that within these forums, if it's a forum for ministers of environment, or even if it's a forum for ministers of environment and health, we are now trying to bring in, or we are now trying to encourage the ministers of planning and ministers of finance to be part of this forum, so that they can understand from a first hand what the frustrations of these ministers are, what the frustrations of the ministries are, and also see the importance, for example, of providing additional resources to ministers of environment in this case. So gradually we are now trying to bring on board ministers of finance, ministers of planning, so that they are part of this and they can better understand what the issues are and therefore be able to, as we go along, provide additional resources to the ministries of environment. The second question was why we've been working closely with just ministries of environment and health and not ministries of education, for example. I'll give you an example. But before the example is that for us as UN Environment, our key entry point in our working with the different countries is through ministers of environment. Our mandate as one of the UN organizations is focusing on environment. So our entry point working with the governments is ministries of environment. World Health Organization, entry point is working with the ministries of health. And as I said, UN Environment, WHO, we have come together to bring the two sectors together. Now, after the two ministers or the two ministries adopted the Libreville Declaration, what we did as WHO and UN Environment was to work with the various governments to set up what we call the country task teams in each of the countries. Now, these country task teams working on health and environment was co-chaired by representatives of Ministry of Health and Ministry of Environment. But then, these task teams, one of the conditions was to bring on board all the other relevant ministerial sectors and all other relevant stakeholders. So, for example, the task team which was organized in Kenya had ministries of environment and health co-chairing, but we had ministries of agriculture represented, Ministry of Education was represented, Ministry of Energy was represented, universities were represented in this task force, and these apply to other countries as well. So basically what I'm trying to say, in as much as our entry point was the two ministries, at the country level, for those countries that put together the country task team to work on these issues, they were able to bring on board all other relevant sectors and ministries. With regard to the third question in terms of having policies in place and whether we have structures to get this implemented, I do agree with you 100%. We have enough policies. I believe we have policies to address each and every challenge that we continue to face related to environment and health. What is lacking, of course, is the effective implementation of these policies. And as I mentioned again, this is a responsibility that now at country level, they have to put in place mechanisms to ensure that these policies are implemented. But you'll recall when I started my talk is that what is your role as a citizen? As youth, you have a network. I think in most countries now, when you look at the percentage of youth overall, in terms of the population, it's probably in most countries 60 to 70%. But we are not able to influence, we are not able to put to task our leaders. Take an example of Kenya. We have elections coming up in the next few months. What kind of leaders do you elect? As youth, you're the majority of the voters. You need to elect leaders who are going to be able to implement some of these issues and not elect leaders on the basis of friendship or on the basis of other issues. So we need to be objective in terms of, for example, from the electoral process, make sure that we put in place people who are able to drive the country's agenda in the right direction. At the same time, when you get an opportunity to participate in some of these forums, in some of the decision-making meetings, you need to make your voice heard. And I think for us, hosting you and being part of your discussions here is really to give you the information so that you are better informed and you can use this information to put to task your leaders in terms of making sure that they implement these policies which are already in place. So I think we have a big role as youth to play, and we need to take advantage of that opportunity to make sure that we push for the implementation of these policies. I guess I'm taking more time than I was allocated, but if it's agreeable, I can take one last round of questions. At the back, one, and then there's a lady there, two, and then on this side, three.
Yeah, I'm John Waweru Gakunga, representing Interwaste Research and Development East Africa Trust. And I'm also a lecturer at Kenyatta University. Now, because of this resource, documents we are, we are dealing with today or from yesterday, and we are mostly people of knowledge gathering. How can we get access to these documents? Is there a way you can put them on the internet so that we can be able to download, or that's my concern, because I tried last evening, but I could not be able to access. Thank you.
My name is Winnie from Egerton, and my question would be, in retrospect to your idea that there was a country task team that was set up that combined the Ministry of Health and Environment. Mine would be, would you expound a bit on which policy instruments they have used to maybe deliver the policy that the Ministry of Environment and Health want to achieve.
Thank you so much. This is Mukisa Davis from Kampala, Uganda. My concern is about, you talked of 2 million people who died due to air pollution, but you didn't give us some statistics about Kenya in terms of these numbers. These people die, but you are giving at the global perspective. And then another one is how best can we ensure that the youth can understand some of the commitments and then the policies which are in place, because I think there is an issue of knowledge gap when it comes to understanding on some of these policies. Thank you so much.
Okay, thanks. Now, the first question in terms of knowledge gathering and access, I'm a little surprised that you couldn't access the information. Because when you go, for example, to the UN Environment website, there is actually a lot of information. And this information is actually on thematic. You'll get information on climate change, you'll get information on ecosystems, you'll get information on disasters, you'll get information on chemicals and waste, resource efficiency and all that. But again, if you have difficulties in accessing this, I think that's why we are here. You can always get in touch with us, and if you have any particular area that you would want to get information on, then we can always try and help in terms of making sure that that information is available to you. So it's there, but if you have difficulties in accessing that, we'll be happy to help. I think there's some colleague of mine behind there who is actually dealing with information. Florence, maybe if you could just, so that they see you, and yeah.
Okay, maybe if I could just clarify or add on to what he said. Actually, if you go to the UNEP website, look for a tab that says repository. We have all publications, all sorts of publications on different things that we do, touching on chemicals and waste, on the different thematic areas and programs of UNEP. If you also, you can also get a lot of information just as far as work going on the ground on the different programs. But I think one other thing we were actually just discussing here with my friend, and maybe this is something the organizers can consider going forward, assuming similar youth conferences like this would be held, maybe in terms of also just availing information as it's generated throughout a conference like this, because usually what we do, for instance, with UNEA, there's a portal that's available for us to then upload information, which could be, presentations and discussions as they're ongoing. And that's normally done live as, discussions go on. So it's something that I think would be good and to be considered maybe going forward in similar forums like this. So it's a proposal I'm making and challenging the organizers, Ministry of Environment and NYOGS going forward. You could consider coming up with a mechanism or a way of probably availing proceedings of meetings like this, so that at the end of the day people can go online and be able to access whatever documents and discussions that are reached in forums like this. But again, just go to the UNEP website. Under repository, you can search anything under the different thematic areas like you mentioned. We have climate change, chemicals and waste, all of that is there. And if you have any difficulties or are looking for something in particular which you can't access, you can always reach out to us and we'll be happy to assist.
Thank you. Quickly, I think we are running out of time. On the second question, in terms of the policy instruments related to the country task teams, What I would say is that, I wish we had time. I would really take you through in terms of what was actually done. But when the country task team got together, they looked at the number of policies from the environment perspective which are relevant to health and environment. They looked from the health side, the number of policies which are there, which are addressing different health issues. And they put together all these policies and realized that the policies are there, but the problem is these are not being implemented. Some of the policies, of course, are outdated, which of course needs revision and needs to be looked at, but they are there. The best that I could provide, again, as I mentioned, the report was actually prepared. For example, Kenya, there is a report that was prepared which outlines and which highlights all these policies which are in place and which apply both for health and environment. So we can always try and provide you with that report, which will give you more information on the policies that they looked at. The last one, in terms of the statistics, I think for lack of time, we couldn't get into the details. The statistics are there. As I mentioned, we produced a report, the African Environment Outlook Report 3, which was focusing on health and environment, and which has specific statistics as it relates to Africa, but also gives some statistics at the country level. So this report is available with the necessary information and statistics, and you can always get this information. In terms of how the youth can understand policies, one is through this kind of forums, through other forums where you have interaction with the policymakers, that's the ministers. But again, one more important thing is that we need to read and research. Most of this information is available online, but if we don't spare time to read, research, you'll never get to understand what's going on. So I would encourage you, when you have some spare time, please use that time to do quite a bit of research and reading, and I'm sure you'll be able to get access to some of this. But of course, where you have difficulties, we are always available to provide any information that you may require. So thank you very much. I think I'll stop there and give an opportunity to other presenters for the rest of the day. Thank you, and have a nice day.
Thank you, David, for the amazing presentation. Good morning once again. For those of you who have joined us late, my name is Esther Muiruri, and I'll be taking you through this session. I want just to remind you that the conversation is ongoing online, and would like to request you to share the link with your colleagues and other young people who are not represented here physically, and they can be able to watch us live and maybe share their comments. So when you go to YouTube, look for United Nations office at Nairobi, and then click on the live button, like the video that shows live, yeah? And then you can share that link with your colleagues and friends. Okay, I also want to remind us that we also want to take whatever we are discussing out of the conference walls, and through social media we can share some of the key points that we are discussing with those who are not able to come here physically, and we can do so by tweeting using the hashtag PYC Nairobi. We can tag at UNEP, also tag PYC Nairobi, both at Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, and at UNEP_ITC at all social medias. So let us do that. So this session is actually very interesting, and I'm hoping that it's going to be very interactive, as that was a request. And that is also what we intended to see, so that we can see what we are doing as young people and share ideas. And to help me discuss the interlinkages between the built environment and natural environment, or what other people would call it, the blue economy and brown economy. I have two amazing speakers. One of them is on the way, so he'll be able to join us as we continue. But to start with, I'd like to introduce Dr. John Chumo, who is the chair of the County Executive Caucus of Environment in Kenya, to just give an introduction remarks. And I hope that this will you'll set up a good discussion, and so that we can share whatever we are doing at our different counties. Dr. Chumo, we have representatives from different counties in Kenya, and also young people from different countries in Africa. So we are hoping that we are going to share a lot and learn from your experience, but also to see what you can take back from what young people are doing. Karibu.
Thank you so much. Good morning. As you have been told, my name is John Kipkorir Chumo. I'm the CC in charge of lands, environment, and natural resources from Nandi County, and also the chair of the CCs in charge of environment, the Council of Governors, and also the secretary to the National Environment Complaints Committee. I come here today to join you, and I've been told that most of us who are here today are the youth. The speaker who has just left has indicated that over about 60 to 70% of the population at the moment are actually the youth. Want to say that on behalf of the Council of Governors, on behalf of there's 47 counties in this country. I'm sure most of you come from Kenya, and others who are visitors. I wanted to say that in the year 2010, Kenyans passed a constitution that gave us a devolved system of governance, where we have 47 governments from the regional levels in this country in a devolved system. And under that, it gave out very clearly the role of the national government and the role of the county governments. And in particular, the constitution also gave us the functions of both the national government and the county governments at what we call the Schedule 4 of our constitution. And mostly, there are very many functions. Some of them include the issues of solid waste management, issues to do with planning of our towns or our cities. And in this case, therefore, I want to say that it was for the very many years, people of Kenya were actually yearning to have that kind of system where the counties, or rather the people in the rural areas, are actually accessing the information, they're accessing the resources, and they're able to access the development. And I want to say that for the last 4 years now, we are now going for election, and at least there are many things that have happened across the counties. And you will realize that most of the counties at the moment are now having their towns, which were actually, basically, some of them were actually centers 5 or 10 years ago, but they have now been, because of the development brought closer to them, they have been able to have them. And obviously, there are challenges coming up. The issue of planning, the issue of resource utilization, and the issue of management of those towns. And I want to say that under the SDGs, Sustainable Development Goals, the 17 of them, we realized that when it comes to the issues of development, like number 11 of our SDGs basically talks about the issue of cities and how we can have sustainable cities where we can be able to have a minimal usage of energy, a minimal usage of water, reducing poverty and all that. At the same time, reducing also the emission of the carbon dioxide or the greenhouse gases from these towns or from these small cities. I want to say therefore that in case going with the SDGs that we have, it has actually captured most of the things on the issue of energy, because when you are talking about towns coming up, you will have to actually consider the issue of energy. You will have to consider the issue of how you would be able to make it clean in terms of management of the solid waste, for example, or any other hazardous waste that could be found. We are also saying that in the same breath, other towns also coming up, you'll also need to consider the issue of water provision. And this, therefore, comes with the issue of sanitation. And I want to say that in Kenya, and in particular in most of the counties that we come from, we are actually now trying to ensure that proper planning, and that is why in the 2013, when the county governments came in, one of the things that was put up was something called County Integrated Development Plans. The County Integrated Development Plans is actually a plan set up to show where the counties were in before 2013, and in the next 5 years where it would be, and in terms of issues to do with energy, to do with waste management, to do with water, to how we could be able to reduce poverty across the counties and all that. And based on that CIDB, for example, the counties were able to budget based on the little resources that they would be able to get from the national government to ensure that the county integrated development plan are actually actualized. And I'm saying at the level of the county governments, and when we come back to the level of our country, then we are likely talking about several, for example, the 4 cities. We have Nairobi, we have Mombasa, we have Eldoret, we have Kisumu, for example. Those are just a few, but it is just an example of what challenges we are getting across the country with respect to the issues of planning, to the issues of management of the resources. And therefore, if you look at all the 17 sustainable development goals, we are trying to ensure that all the goals fit to the growth of our towns. And there is a lot of upcoming structures, upcoming of infrastructure within the country. But at the same time, we want now to balance the issue of development against the issue of conservation. And that is why later I'll be able to present the situation on issues of solid waste in this country as a presentation later. But for now, I wanted to say that there is a serious challenge. And the challenge, as I've said, is on actually relying on the issue of management of the resources in terms of, we want to look at, for example, Nairobi City, for example, that where our, how many, we have very many infrastructure, buildings, malls and all that's being built every day. But at the same time, land, for example, is not expanding. But at the same time, there are other challenges, like, for example, our rivers crisscrossing the town becoming heavily polluted. We are also saying, at the same time, that the many roads being built, at least there is some expansion, but there is still a challenge of the issue of congestion. And we are actually realizing, or we are actually feeling a lot of air pollution across, for example, the four towns that I've actually mentioned. Nairobi, for example, has a lot of, there are many people now coming in. Then there is also the other problem of settlement. We are getting, issues to do with slum across the town. It's a challenge. And this, therefore, if you compare to what a green city is supposed to be, in terms of, for example, even based on the sustainable development goals that we have, you will find, for example, that there is a big challenge. But I want to say that there is hope, in the sense that whether it is the Ministry of Environment, whether it is the Ministry of Planning, whether it is the Ministry of Infrastructure, we are all trying to come up to a better way, coming up with action plans to ensure that proper planning of our towns are actually put in place so that we can be able to have clean water, have very nice sanitation, have less congested town, and improve the levels of living so that the issue of slums can be reduced and people can be able to get affordable settlements and housing. And those are the kind of things that both the national government and the county government in Kenya is trying as much as possible to do it. We want therefore to say that this is a challenge, not only in Kenya. If you go across Africa, you'll also find most of the towns are at that level. We are actually trying to ensure that, and the major thing in most of the towns is actually the issue of congestion, the issue of infrastructure, the kind of settlement, and the big issue here is actually the solid waste management in most of our towns. You'll find, for example, that you go across the estates, you go across the places where people are living, and you'll find, for example, that there's a lot of, the waste is not well managed. I would want to say, for example, that in Kenya, and through the Ministry of Environment and Natural Resources, and I'm happy that yesterday I was told that the minister or the CS in charge of environment was here, and I hope she was able to discuss about the banning of polythene bags, for example. That this is indeed a crisis. It's an issue that it should have been done a long time ago. I will give you a graphical representation on how the plastics, for example, have really damaged our environment in this country. And that is why we support the banning of plastics in this country. I want also to say the statistics that we have is actually, we know in Kenya, or rather in in the whole world, only about 2 to 3% of land is actually cities. The other, and out of that, almost 70 to 80% of energy is actually consumed in our towns, as compared to about 20% that is actually consumed in the rural setup. That therefore says, if we are actually talking about 80% of the energy being used in town, then the question would be, what kind of energy are we talking about? And obviously, we are actually saying that we should be moving towards green energy, renewable kind of energy that can be able to take us to reduce the greenhouse gases and, reduce the effects of climate change. Basically, therefore, I want to say that with the sustainable development goals and vis-a-vis the towns that are coming up and the cities, we are saying that we are trying to ensure that at least by 2030 and all that, we should be able to bridge the gap in terms of issues to do with the solid waste and issues to do with water provision, issues to do with energy consumption, and issues to do with pollution being reduced and those kind of things. And it is not only the government doing that, it is all of us. We need the support of all other stakeholders, not only the government, it should also be from other, whether it is NGOs, non-governmental organizations, whether it is development partners, whether it is the citizens themselves, so that we can be able to take our towns or our cities to another level. Thank you.
Thank you, Daktari. I said this session will be interactive, so I've taken a few things from his presentation, and one thing that we've been able to witness is that there's always a drift between economic development and environment sustainability. We've seen the discussion ongoing regarding the railway and our national park. We've seen also the development projects that are ongoing in Kiambu County. For example, they are replacing the plantations with real estate. Yes. So my question would be, you have also talked about sustainable cities, and some of these challenges we've been discussing since yesterday are also experienced in our cities. What do we need to do as governments? We've seen you're doing a lot of amazing work, that is great, from the national and the county government. But what is it that we need to do to ensure that we engage young people? Because at the end of the day, we have a huge pool of young people who are highly educated. I must say that Kenya has educated like a lot of people, but we are still struggling with job, but I haven't seen any efforts from the government to actually use this pool of resources to help them like face some of these challenges and come with solutions. So I'd like to throw this question to you and also to the floor. What do we need to do, or what is it that needs to be done so that we can forge good partnerships with the government and other stakeholders and help them face some of these challenges and come up with sustainable solutions? Yeah.
Yes, I can see somebody is trying to ask some question. Yes?
Hello, my name is Samora Omodo, and I'm representing Kisumu County. And I like what you've just said, and that we are trying to build sustainable green cities. But I'd like to point out that before they become green, first they're already cities which are encountering so many problems. And within these cities, one thing that I've not heard since the beginning of this conference, maybe being addressed, that I'd like to bring up, is these cartels. Cartels, I believe, are one of the biggest enemies of the youth, because let's say as youth, we've come up with solutions that we think we can help the country with in our minds. Okay, let's say, for example, just green fuel. Let's say fuel, the fuel industry. Now, there's some very wealthy businessmen who have gained their wealth over the years through these these non-environmental sustainable methods, like the promotion of crude oil compared to the promotion of renewable energy for our basic energy needs. So this person is earning billions of shillings comfortably because of selling a commodity that will never help our society to grow into that economic development that we're talking about. So UNEP is one of the big bodies, or this kind of bodies that we are facing today. There are some of the biggest bodies that we have that can even speak on the youth's behalf. But we've not seen any change for years and years and years and years, and we have policies and policies and policies. And we... Sorry,
I want to cut you short. So you have explained the challenge. What do you think that needs to be done so that we can solve this challenge?
Well, I'm here to also learn, and I'm here to pose these questions also to people who have authority and can actually make a difference. Because when you say youth can throw out, when you say that youth can affect the whole process by individually, maybe saving the banana skin in your handbag or in your whatever, it's fair. But old people as well also litter, so that's not a youth-only Okay.
Yes.
I think you get
Yes,
my
Okay,
point.
I've gotten the
yeah,
point.
yeah, thank you.
So please address it.
Simon. I'm from Nyamira County, and my suggestion is that we must start fighting corruption, because some of the issues that have been raised here, like the cleaning up of cities, if you look back, there is a time when Johnny Michuki was a minister. He tried to clean the Nairobi River. When he left, Nairobi has changed to what it was. Where was the money taken to? When he was in the Ministry of Transport, he tried to streamline the ministry. When he left, what is happening? Another thing that we can do is to involve the public. The county government are given a lot of money, and they also collect tax and revenues from the public. But when it comes to implementation of projects, they don't involve the public and the youths. Like, for example, most of the counties have started projects which are not beneficial to the public. If I can mention a county like Kisii, Nyamira, or Kisumu, Kakamega, where they have started constructing border shed. Is that a priority when we're seeing garbage being dumped everywhere? Let us find a way how we can be able to involve the public in our projects. And thirdly, I could also want to ask the United Nations to also find a way in the way they are implementing their project. You see, UN is one of the organizations that is funding most of LCD, this is the developing countries. Through your funding, you can implement, you can be able to influence the application of this and the implementation of these policies. Because if you can even threaten that we are not going to finance you if you're not going to do this, or you can also enter into partnership.
Okay, thank you so much. I think we've gotten the point. Please make your points brief. We don't want to also cut in. Yes.
Yes, thank you so much, Dr. Mine is a compliment and a question. Number one, the presentation you've given unto us is very good, and that is encouraging. If you are the chairman of all the environmental CECs in Kenya, the 47 counties, that is good. When Ombisi was giving out his presentation, he lamented about something, that really this country actually allocates very little amount in terms of issues touching on environment. And since yesterday, we've been listening here about the dangers and the troubles that waste management has caused onto this country. Hence also issues to do with climate change. Maybe could you tell us, share with us, where the trouble has been? Why can't you really look into issues that are really damaging into the lives of the people? You also touched this with the health issues. Why is it not really being key to you as the chair and representing all the county governments? Don't you think that this would offer you a very good audience and forum, maybe to start actually engaging? Because you also mentioned that the population of youths in this country is around 70%. That's a big number, okay? And this is a force. A lot of them have been talking about unemployment issues, meaning that they have a lot of time that they can really engage and do better things. Jubilee government, I don't want to bring politics into this, promised that they will be creating a lot of employment opportunities to young people. What are we doing really to make sure that we move from these theoretical levels to practicalities? Thank you.
Yes.
And I think that should be the last question, and then we let Daktari respond.
Okay,
Please.
thank you. My name is Doris Moseti from Mukuru, Nairobi. This CC has talked about the slum, but you have not mentioned a lot about it. In the informal settlement, we generate a lot of waste because we are congested in a small area. What has the county done to see that that solid waste is well managed? Because in the informal settlement, youth do the garbage collection, they do the latrine emptying, but all of it is drained in the river. What has the county done to see that the environment in the informal settlement is clean?
Thank you so much. I want to start first of all to agree with some of the comments mentioned by across, at least across cutting issue. The issue of the management of our towns and especially in the management of our resources. And the aspect here is a cancer called corruption. And I want to say that as a country, we are aware that the problem that has actually bedeviled our running of our institutions has been the issue of corruption. If you look at why, for example, Nairobi is what it is, if you go to the maps of 1963, for example, or even 1980s, you will clearly see that there was a plan to have this place becoming a place for settlement in terms of high density, low density settlement areas. There was also areas which were actually put aside for purposes of recreation. There were other places put aside for riparian areas. But the problem is, over time, we have had a lot of serious land grabbing. And I think this is a disease that has actually, we can't hide. You know, it's just true to say that this is an issue that really requires a lot of people or the government itself and all other people coming in to address it. Because I think it's an issue, not only in Nairobi, even in Mombasa, for example. You will realize, for example, some of the places that were actually even beaches for which were actually set aside for purposes of recreation are no longer there. People have just taken it, they have built houses, they have done some other things. The same thing applies to Eldoret, the same thing applies to Kisii and all that. So it's an issue, and I think if you look at the conversation that every Kenyan now is talking about is that we need to change. There is we have no reason not to have to check the government to ensure that the institutions given power or mandated by law to ensure that issues to do with corruption is eradicated is actually supposed to do their work. The other thing that we are saying is that you've mentioned the issue, for example, that cartels are there. And the same cartels also go with it's actually corrupt shady deals that are actually normally done. Because in Kenya, we have enough legislation. I don't want to cheat you. Like, for example, most of you are aware that we have environmental laws enough, we have agricultural laws enough, we have water laws enough, we have all of them. But the big problem that we have in this country is the issue of implementation. If, for example, MCA Act was implemented, even 20% of it, those issues we are talking about here today would be something of the past. But I think we have a problem, and that problem needs to be addressed internally as a government, and at the same time have the Kenyans themselves also doing oversight that this thing is not actually being done. The other issue that somebody has raised is the issue of the budget, the resources given to the Ministry of Environment. I want to say, as the chair of the CCC in charge of Environment and Natural Resources, since 2013, we've been fighting to ensure that more resources are also brought closer to the people. That is why in Kenya now, we get about 15% of the exchequer. The other almost 85% still in the national government. But that's not the discussion for today. The issue is, you realize, for example, that even in the national government, we have the ministries, We have the Ministry of Agriculture, we have the Ministry of Security, we have the Ministry of Health, we have Ministry of Infrastructure. But when it comes to the issue of, priority in terms of allocation of resources, the last one becomes environment, even in the national government. So when you come to the to the counties, the same problem is also devolved. To an extent that you will find, for example, the Ministry of Environment is given, for example, maybe 10 billion, while the other ministries up there are given others 300 billion, 400 billion, and those kind of things. But the question is, I think we need to have a paradigm shift that you cannot talk about agriculture without talking about environment. You cannot talk about infrastructure without considering environment. In fact, environment is supposed to be given more resources than the other. And we have actually done a lot of petitioning to the national government to ensure that in future, the Department of Environment, both the national and the county governments, are given more money for purposes of ensuring that sustainable development or the issues of environment are taken care of at that level. Even if you look at Kenya, if the Minister of Security, your class is somewhere. The Minister of Environment, if you are today taken from maybe from finance and you are taken to environment, most of the people would imagine that you have been demoted because they think environment is nothing. And that is why we have issues with the issue of SGR, for example, that today, because people don't look at the priority of environment, somebody would say, what I want to do is put up a structure in terms of SGR. We are saying SGR as people of Kenya that we support it. But we don't support SGR passing, for example, in our, in our wildlife park. Those are the issues that we need to consider. We are saying, for example, you cannot put up a multi-million dam in a forest. I come from Nandi, where the Ministry of, at that time, Regional Development, wanted to put up a multi-million dam where they were supposed to clear 3,000 acres of indigenous forests. And I think I came up and stopped it, because you cannot clear 3,000 acres of indigenous forests for purposes of coming up with a dam. Because in Kenya, I think we have had those problems. But I think I want to suggest, and I want to tell you that we actually, I think Kenyans now, the youth are there. And the youth, you have a lot of work. It's only that probably we've not, come up with a situation where you can be able to be involved. Because everything that is being done nowadays, there is an aspect of public participation. And no project would, for example, will go through without public participation. And if public participation is done, then the input of the youth is supposed to be taken care of there. The issue of capacity building. All this issue of solid waste management that my sister there is talking about, who are supposed, for example, to do recycling, who are supposed to do the issue of separating and all that. And then you convert the waste to energy, or convert the waste to money. So there are a lot of things that the youth can be able to do it. The only problem is that I think, without fear of any contradiction, most of our youth have also sat and imagine that the politicians and who can give you money. You need to fight for your space. And I think this is part of the congregations of fighting for your space.
Yes. Okay, thank you so much, Daktari. That was an amazing discussion.
I think there are only two. I can give the two of them.
We are really bad. We are really bad on time, and I also want you guys to go and have tea. So I'd like to thank you, Daktari, for amazing presentation and tackling the questions. One recommendation that we'd like you to take home is that our Kenyan youth have also participated in the Habitat 3 process, which was concluded last year in Quito. And one of the key recommendations was to implement a young professionals program, which would bring together young people who are interested in sustainable cities, in planning, in urban designing, in environment, and all these cross-cutting issues, whereby we'll be having a learning process, like a whole year learning process of transforming, like, how do I say this? You have a program that you implement a project within different cities. You have like transferring talents from Nairobi, let's say, to Mombasa and Kisumu and Eldoret, like that, so that you can see how best we can utilize these resources that we have from young people. The other thing I want to mention is that we see a lot of energy during election year period. Young people, we are very accessible during election year period. We also want to see the same thing when we are talking about development issues and environment issues. We also want to see you as our leaders being aggressive in looking into how we can partner with you during these development issues, which really matter more than election year period. So I think that is something that cuts across not only in Kenya, but across the African countries. And we are very happy that you have been able to join us during this session and have been able to give us some of the progress that the government are doing. So at this point, I'd like to invite Haron to give us direction on what to do next. Thank you.
Wow, those were amazing remarks from the Daktari. Now, thank you, Daktari, for that session. I request that we are really behind schedule in terms of time. We are not really doing good. So, after this, we'll be able to go to for tea break. Then immediately from there, we will go to breakout sessions in your program. There was a breakout session that was meant to be yesterday. You can check those rooms. Please help me with that program. Yes. Breakout session 1, with regards to the Paris Agreement and the implementation of NDCs in Africa, with a question on how does climate change underpin capacity development on hazardous chemicals and waste management streams. Then that one will be in room 11. Room 11 is at upstairs. You go down there where you are taking coffee, then just straight up. Room 11 is there. Then we'll have the review of the and domestication of the 3 UN conventions on hazardous chemicals and waste in Africa. It will happen here, this room. Advancing social innovation that reduces vulnerability on youth and environment. It will be in room 10, not room 7. Please correct that one. Room 10. So room 10 is still upstairs. You go the same way, but we'll have people who will be able to assist you to get those rooms. Then we'll have on demographic dividend on Africa Urban Agenda for Sustainability, room 9. Then we'll have citizen scientists, youth participation on air pollution and monitoring, a case study by Stockholm Environment Institute, not environmental. Stockholm Environment Institute. Okay? So, I don't know how we are going to group ourselves so that we can be able to fit into these sessions. Who can propose? I like democracy. How do you want us to do it so that we can take a few minutes on that? Yes, please.
Thank you so much for the opportunity. Before I give my proposal, I just have one request to the CAC Environment. Thank you so much for fighting for to save that forest in Nandi, but I have one more request. We have a railway park that is threatening, a railway gate that is threatening the Nairobi National Park. They want to pass a railway, the Standard Railway through the Nairobi National Park. I really pray that you could be our champion, the youth champion that you could depend on in the government to help us save Nairobi National Park from being invaded by the proposed train. That's a special request. And on the breakup session, maybe you could just do a 1, 2, 3, 4. Everyone start 1, 2, 3, 4, and then all the ones go to the first group, the twos go to the second group, and the three go to the third group, fourth and fifth. Maybe that's my proposal.
Behind, Beatrice.
For the interest of time, I'll second his suggestion. For the interest of time.
Sorry?
For the interest of time, I'll second his proposal. Like
Okay.
we take numbers based on the number of breakout sessions that we're having.
Seconded? Yes, please.
My suggestion is, this process is a participatory process and is voluntary. So I feel that we should do this based on interest. Where somebody feels that I really have interest on this, we should go.
Okay. We have two proposals, one in terms of the numbering, the second one in terms of interest. So who adopt interest? Okay, numbers, okay, interest adopted. So we'll be able to go to those sessions according to the interest, okay? So please be fruitful on the conversation so that we can be able to have fruitful outcomes, okay? Thank you so much. We'll be passing through those breakout sessions so that we can be able to see what is happening. Thank you so much. Few minutes in tea break.
na ninaongea. Ni Photoshop.
Technicians, please. Technicians.
Excuse me, Group 1 convener. Group 1 convener, please, time is up. Come in front or we choose somebody else. Group 1 convener, time is up. Come in front or will you allow us to elect another convener? So please, we are only giving you 1 minute to take charge. Yeah, please make the announcements that you let Edward come.
Yeah. No, there's another one.
You take charge.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning. The session is about to begin. Kindly take your seats. My group is not here.
Your group is in room 13.
Okay.
Yes. This one. Room 11.
See hapa?
See hapa.
Jesus Christ, son of Nazareth. Brian Najua.
Hi guys, please let's go to the breakout session because we have only 30 minutes. Please, please. This room is for session number 2, okay? Domestication of the 3 UN conventions. Sawa sawa, please, 30 minutes.
One, two, three, 4, 5, 6. Hey, focus imekataa manini? And so, and then. Kwani inakataa manini? Yes.
Hello. Good morning. Okay, this session is about reviewing the domestication of the 3 UN conventions on management of hazardous chemicals and waste in Africa. So I'll be able to we'll take a few minutes so that you can be able to discuss on this particular session. So I believe you are the people who are going to be in this session, okay? Thank you. Which professor? No, he's not coming. Okay, so I'm going to take this session on behalf of Professor Abdurrahman Bari. Of course, he's going to come back so that he can be able to answer some questions on the session with regards to the session. But still, I'll be able to take up the option of discussing after the presentation so that we can be able to understand where we are, what we are supposed to do, and how we are going to move forward in terms of this session. So, I will start the presentation. The implementing international environmental instruments. International instruments need to be made applicable at the national level so that they can be able to be understood, at the same time be implemented in terms of policy framework from the national to the local levels. The implementation at the national level is either by action taken by each party or a collective action by parties. Applications at the national level by domesticating MEAs, that is multilateral environmental agreements, may be by monist or dualist approach. It is important to note, however, since some MEAs are not self-executing, actions may still be expected. A party implementing the MEA may adopt policies and legislations or may set up or strengthen the required institutions or take up administrative actions. I believe you understand that in every government, we have the Ministry of Environment, and within the Ministry of Environment, we have the Directorate in charge of multilateral agreements. This directorate is the one in charge of signing government agreements. So these agreements, when they have been signed by this directorate, then they are implemented by that particular ministry or the related ministry within that government. So I take an example of Kenya. In Kenya, we have the Ministry of Environment and Natural Resources, and in the Ministry of Environment, we have the Directorate of Multilateral Agreements. So that is why in this particular presentation, Professor alluded to the party implementing the multilateral environmental agreements may adopt policies. So by adopting the policies, it's for instance the Paris Agreement under the UNFCCC, the ministry are signed to the Paris Agreement, and it means they adopted to the Paris Agreement. Okay? So, after adopting to that agreement, now you implement. Or you go to another way by legislating the agreement. Those are the ways that the domestication of the conventions can be done. When the provisions require the adoption of policy, parties should adopt a clear policy basis with clear goals and procedures and practices to ensure coherence and predictability of the actions being taken, and the rights and obligations, efficiency of management, and ease of implementation. As for taking administrative action, this may include actions such as to prepare action plans, inventories, to designate sites, or appoint focal points. It is the prerogative of each party. When you talk about each party, it means government, to decide how it incorporates ANAMEA's obligations into national legislation, taking into account its needs and legal practices. Parties have options of developing specific legislations on MEA, amending existing legislations, or where applicable, incorporating the chapter into comprehensive legislations. Legislation should not be incompatible with the provisions of the convention. So this particular discussion is about how are we localizing the agreements. And the agreements that we are talking about here are the conventions under the hazardous chemicals and the waste. For instance, the Basel Convention, the Bamako, and the Basel. So those conventions, when they are passed at the global level, then they are being domesticated at the national level under the framework which of course, I discussed earlier. The Convention Secretariat and the UN Environment do provide assistance in this process of developing legislation. This assistance for the implementing mayors may include providing technical assistance and advisory services and preparing model legislations or guidance material to assist parties in developing legislation. Effective and enforceable legislation is not that which seeks to provide practical solutions to a problem, which is being regulated in accordance with the guidance provided by the provisions of the mayor, taking into account a country's particular context and its human and other resources. Chemicals and waste mayors. So, as I explained earlier, these are the conventions under the UN framework. We have the Basel Convention, which deals with the transboundary movement of hazardous waste and disposal, which was adopted in May 1992, and 181 member states have adopted it. We have the Rotterdam Convention, which is dealing with the procedures of hazardous chemicals and waste in the international trade. which has been ratified by 154 countries. We have the Stockholm Convention dealing with the persistent organic pollutants, adopted by 179 countries. We have Minamata Convention dealing with mercury and its compounds. We have the Bamako Convention dealing with the imports of hazardous wastes into Africa and their management within Africa, ratified by 25 countries. We have SAMC Convention, which deals with the integrated management of chemicals. So these conventions are actually the ones that we are dealing with under this particular conference. So it means we need to understand the conventions articulately so that we can be able to understand the frameworks which we are working under and how we can be able to approach our countries and how, so that we can be able to know the domestication of these conventions, how far it is, and how protective are we in terms of the implementation and the opportunities available within the framework. The scope of the conventions. Altogether, the C and W conventions cover the production, use, trade, and disposal of hazardous chemicals and wastes. The Basel conventions deal with you can see the picture there, hazardous liquids and poisonous substances. The Rotterdam Convention promotes shared responsibility and cooperative effects among parties in the international trade of certain hazardous chemicals by using the prior informed consent, that's the PSC, procedures. The Stockholm Convention deals with the elimination, to eliminate production and use of internationally produced POPs. You remember in the morning I talked about the POPs. Minimize, where feasible, eliminate releases of an internationally produced POPs. Clean up old stockpiles and equipment containing POPs. Support the transition to safer alternatives. Target additional POPs for action. Bamako Convention. The Bamako Convention deals on the ban of the imports into Africa and the control of transboundary movement and management of hazardous waste within Africa. Bamako Convention on the national definitions of hazardous waste, Article 3 of the convention. It means when the convention was ratified, each state, quoting, each state shall inform the Secretariat of the wastes considered or defined as hazardous under its national legislation and any requirements concerning transboundary movement procedures applicable to such wastes. So each country has an obligation that within your country you need to report back to the Secretariat of the Bamako Convention on what is happening within your country and what are the national legislative framework put in place to support the minimization of transboundary movement of hazardous chemicals. Those are hazardous waste import bans, Article 4 of the convention. The ban on dumping of hazardous waste at sea and internal waters, it is still Article 4. We have waste generation in Africa, still Article 4. the adoption of precautionary measures, obligation of transport and transboundary movement of hazardous waste from the contracting parties, Article 3 here, in terms of divination of hazardous waste, each party shall inform the Secretariat of Wastes considered or divined as hazardous. I take an example of Kenya. This is done by NEMA, the National Environment Management Authority, to divine the hazardous chemicals under its national legislation framework and of any requirement concerning the transboundary movement procedures applicable to such wastes. On trade, under Article 4 of the Basel Convention, we have parties shall prohibit or shall not permit the export of hazardous wastes and other wastes to the parties which have prohibited the imports of such wastes. Parties shall prohibit or shall not permit the export of hazardous wastes and other wastes if the state of import does not consent in writing to the specific imports. The generation of HW Article 4 ensures that the generation of hazardous wastes and other waste within it is produced within to minimize taking into account socio, technology, and economic aspects. Illegal traffic of hazardous under Article 4, the parties consider that illegal traffic in hazardous waste or other waste is criminal. So under the environmental law or the International Environmental Court, we have the article that actually regulates, or any country can be able to sue another country on this particular law, that you are trafficking hazardous chemicals to my country. So this one is the one that is guiding the countries on how to do business in terms of trade. Enforcement of Article 4, each party shall take appropriate legal, administrative, and other measures to implement and enforce the provision of this convention, including measures to prevent and punish conduct in contravention of the convention. Procedures for banned or severely restricted chemicals. Each party that has adopted the final regulatory action, obligations in relation to import and chemical listed in Annex 2 of Article 10 of the Convention, that is the Rotterdam Convention, each party shall implement appropriate legislation or administrative measures to ensure timely decisions within respect to the import of chemical listed in Annex 3. That is still under the localization of these conventions. Obligations in relation to export to chemicals listed in Annex 3. Each exporting party shall take appropriate legislation or administrative measures to ensure that exporters within its jurisdiction comply with the decisions. The Rotterdam Convention, number 4, implementation of the Convention, Article 15, each party shall take such measures as may be necessary to establish and strengthen its national infrastructure and institutions for the effective implementation of this convention. We have moved from to the next, which is Stockholm Convention. Measures to reduce or eliminate release from international production and use, Article 3. measures to reduce or eliminate release from the stockpile and waste, Article 6, which provides for the mechanisms under which the reduction of the chemicals can be done within the country. Now, the approaches to domestication of international conventions. Reference is done. You can be able to check on that particular reference online so that you can be able to see these hazardous chemicals, how they are domesticated, and the report under that. These still are the legislations which you can be able to get those in those links. Joint chemical profiles. I'm moving very fast because of time. Please check the links at your own convenient time so that you can be able to understand what we are talking about on these links. This is the implementation and the localization of the conventions. Okay, the national legislation of the Basel Convention. This section contains the text of the national legislation and other regulatory measures adopted by the parties to implement and enforce the provisions of the Basel Convention. Still, there is a link there, which you can be able to go through at your own convenient time. Thank you so much. That is the presentation. Now, I'd like to open this session for just 5 minutes so that we can be able to have like a discussion of an understanding on what the presentation was talking about, and anyone within the room who has more expertise again within the session can be able to come out and explain more so that what are the opportunities available, how we can be able to follow up on the implementation of these conventions, and the way forward on what we can do to strengthen the implementation of these conventions at our national level. So I open up. Okay, start with you.
Thank you. My name is Wamboi Wahome. I wanted to find out what is the meaning of MEAS once more, as you were doing your presentation.
Multilateral environmental agreements.
Okay, thank you. My second point is, being Kenyan, Article 2.5 of the Constitution means we are a dualist country. That means that all international treaties are bound by the Constitution, because this provision entails that we don't need to have supplementary legislation, we just adapt them as it is. So most times, since the promulgation of the Constitution, we don't need subsidiary legislation to enforce the conventions, so we just take them as it is. That's what dualist mainly entails. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So it means in the context of Kenya, when the agreement is adopted at the international level, it is like agreed within the framework of Kenya. So there is no legislation that is put across to strengthen it. But still, we can be able to get more expertise input on that.
Okay, thank you. My name is Dorcas Njoroge. My concern is that why is it that they missed out on plastic wastes on those conventions? Because they are our main monies. Organic waste, are decomposed naturally and within a very short time. But the real issue that's affecting us, the plastics, are not reflected. Thank you.
Thank you so much. There is is there a response to that concern? Okay, we'll tackle it shortly. Behind, Esther.
Thank you. I wanted to comment on the international agreements and how they work within the Kenyan framework. I happened to participate in the Habitat Conference process, and then the agreed document, in as much as Kenya agreed, during the implementation, what Kenya does is that they come and domesticate what is important and priority to Kenyan, and that is what they implement. So I also had some questions regarding our legislation in terms of the international laws that we get into. But from my participation within that process, I understand that not everything that is in the document you get to implement as a party. You only implement what is a priority to you as a country. Thank you.
Yes, please.
Thank you. My name is Joyce from Tanzania.
The portfolio of gender and youth within the Africa office focused on African issues and looking for African-led solutions within the Africa office. Damaris, are you here? Damaris from the Africa office. Anyway, she will be here. You need to find her and be able, because she's the focal point for that program that is under development. You need to find her because she has been tasked to work with you, not only to tell you what you should be doing, but this time to listen to you, because the messages from the youth are the ones we should act on, not our messages to the youth. So the agenda must be led and driven by you, and our role is to organize and facilitate these processes. So we would like to see as many networks register with the Africa office. Would like to help you develop your stories, because yesterday I heard that part of the problem is people don't know what you are doing, and you have struggles telling your story correctly in a manner that would attract attention of those who are interested in furthering youth programs and activities. So that is one of the tasks that has been set. Your input is valuable into this developing program, because we want to ensure that our regional youth strategy and actions are demand-driven and result-oriented. Please share your successes, your success stories and challenges with us through the Africa office, and showcase your work so that you can give visibility to the things that you do, to the things that are of interest to you. And this may actually work towards opening up opportunities for you within our networks and also across the networks that you have already started establishing. As I said before, one of the things we are going to start is to work with a few of you on a pilot basis to identify 5 youth-led activities which are doing important work linked to environmental sustainability, and to begin to produce stories from the youth as part of our output. This process is going to be a capacity building process. So we'll come up with a structure and then visit you where you are working and then work with you to fill that structure and develop that document. That gives you an opportunity to get published, because you will be the authors, not us. And we will be able to make sure that we use our communication and sharing networks to share your stories with others. Hopefully, the gentleman there who made the comment yesterday, it will enable you to get incentives such as recognition once your story is out there and is being heard. Finally, I'm pleased to note that you have concluded this meeting with an action plan. So the ball is now in your court, and as I said earlier, please translate the plan into action, and UN Environment is available to use whatever means are allowed within its mandate to assist the implementation of this action plan. Of particular interest to me, I have picked up the capacity building part and the partnership part of the parts of the action plan, and I think we will be able to work together to push this. The rest, which relates to inclusion in global dialogues and processes for environment-related matters, including the African Ministerial Conference and the United Nations Environment Assembly, we are going to make sure that those messages reach the offices responsible for coordinating and organizing youth inclusion into these processes. So, on behalf of UN Environment, I wish all of you a great future as you pursue your dreams and aspirations, and I look forward to interacting with you once again, either here in some kind of forum or individually when we meet on the streets of Africa. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for those important closing remarks. Now, let me take this opportunity to appreciate the following organizations who supported us in this particular conference. The first one is, of course, the UN Environment, which is really supported us in having this important conference. I want to appreciate the UN IETC in Japan. They provided resources for us and supporting us in developing the whole entire program. At the same time, I want to appreciate the county government of Nairobi for supporting us in terms of logistics and some lunch yesterday. I want to appreciate Safaricom for the branding of this conference. I want to thank the Ministry of Environment, Kenya, which really supported us in also logistics and the preparation of the program, at the same time, communication to different stakeholders and partners in terms of registration and communicating to you people in towards coming here. I appreciate the speakers and the moderators who came here, so that next time when you have such kind of a conference as we have adopted our statement and our action plan, that we'll be able to have such a conference next year through the support of UNEP. We look forward to have that conference. As we move forward, let's not sleep. Let's work. Let's try to build our young people's capacity at our local levels. I want to thank you so much. When you travel back home, have safe journey, masses. Get connected to our emails. Let's work together as we continue pushing this agenda forward. We hope that this agenda is not going just to remain here. It will be pushed to the next levels. I hope to see you in UNEA 3 and other subsequent meetings that are within the framework. Thank you so much, and God bless you. Housekeeping will immediately finish. We'll be able to go for our coffee But before we leave, we have a cake. Okay? We are celebrating someone who is having his birthday today. So we'll get a cake. Okay? Then we go out for break, then we leave. Thank you so much, Director, for coming. We appreciate you. Thank you. Okay, registration. Those who have not registered in this form, please register. And yeah, so where's the cake? Okay, so we'll have the cutting of the cake outside there. Thank you so much. God bless. Any communication from?
Hey people, my registration forms,
Where's the
they were
birthday
moving
baby?
around, kindly push them forward. Registration forms, thank you. A nice appetite for the cake. Who's the birthday girl or boy?
The boy.
Watching John.
Oh, it's a boy.
A gentleman.
Nice.
John, raise your hand.
It's Johnny. Welcome to my birthday.